So yeah, man, thank you again. I know we're on record now for making the time. I know you've got a busy time ahead of you with the album coming out, and also a bunch of cool tour dates over in Europe and the UK. So first off, I will check on you and see how you're feeling.
I have COVID right
Oh,
now. So I'm on the tail end of it, and it wasn't that bad. So, like I said, I pretty much don't have it anymore, but I have a toddler, and he got it after his mom and I. So now I'm basically just like taking care of him, and he's okay as well, which is good. I mean, none of us feel capital, but we're getting through it.
yeah.
It's that time of year.
Absolutely, yes, yes, indeed, it is. It's getting very cold over here. I know. I was listening to an interview you did in Manchester a year or so back, and I'm further north. I'm closer to Leeds, and it's getting very biting cold in Yorkshire at the moment. So I feel you in terms
You
of
know, sometimes for us traveling like that, it's almost kind of, I mean, it sucks. It's a pain in the ass. I looked at the weather where our tour starts in Munich, and it's going to be like sub-zero temperatures.
yeah,
I think for you guys, like, I don't know, negative 10 or something, like really cold. So
man.
that's a lot, but we don't really have those kind of seasons here in Los Angeles. So it's nice to go and have it for like 10 days
Yeah, yeah,
but not have to live in it. I grew up in the north. I grew up in Seattle, so
yeah.
I'm used to that sort of English kind of weather, and I don't like it.
Yeah, man. I was just in Seattle. I did some work in Boston a few years ago, and I've got friends in Seattle. I went to a couple of great shows at the Showbox, but it reminds me so much of Yorkshire weather when I'm there, and when I go to LA, I'm like, this is awesome. I walk. So I have cerebral palsy, so I walk with two sticks. So on the ice, it like it's really dangerous. You know what I mean? I'll slide around everywhere,
Yeah, yeah.
and like the heat in like LA, if I visit friends there just does something to me, man. I remember in the interview that I watched that I'm going to reference quite a bit in this. You were saying like how like you really struggle with the weather when it's like this. Like Manchester's your favorite musical city, but then you couldn't live there because it would just make you miserable. And I was like I relate to that, even though I live in a very cold and rainy place.
I mean, like I said, that's where I grew up, and
Yeah,
I'm a pretty gloomy person in general, but I think it took me leaving to realize that I'm really not supposed to live somewhere like Seattle or Manchester or I mean, there are virtues, um, and I know that a lot of people will bemoan, they lament, oh, I miss the seasons. And it's like, oh, fucking go back there, dude, because I don't need that. Like even LA, we had a quite rainy winter last year.
mm,
Not cold in any comparable way, but even just that one winter, it reconnected me to that awareness that it's just not for me. It's just
yeah.
definitely like a seasonal affective disorder.
Yeah, man, I feel that. But I mean, you've got again some great opportunities there, which we'll talk about in a second coming up. I mean, basically, the first question I'm going to ask you, I'm going to reference the point you made, about the early days of the band, where it was very much a punk ethos. Obviously very, very industrial, and electronic sonically, but very much a punk ethos to Health. And I remember watching you at the Brudenell in Leeds, thinking this band could translate not only here, but then also in Wembley, where you're about to play and on bigger stages. So do you still feel, Jake, I know you can't speak for John and the other members of the band, do you still feel like Health is a punk band with that punk ethos, or does that change now you're regularly doing these sort of arena tours, and you've obviously got massive shows of your own alongside some of the bigger supporters you've done as well. Do you still see yourself as in that sort of punk ethos of maybe back in the day, the Get Color era, and before that? Do you still feel that, or has it changed?
I mean, I think that there's a bit of a, as we would say in the US, you can take the boy out of the country, you can't take the country out of the boy.
Yeah,
Um, Not in the sense of, pardon me, I might have to clear my throat a couple of times because
please.
I
Yeah,
still am, not in the sense of like a Ian MacKaye minor threat kind of, it's like the core of what we do, but Yeah, we try to have a really high level of production now and try to present the show. Um, we would love to grow to be a large hall, small arena band if it were in our grasp. We're always very, one thing I always said in those interviews though is that we never had huge expectations, but we've always been very ambitious with where we're whatever stage we're at. But I think that where it really comes through is our the continuation of that punk ethos is when you come out of that kind of community, you just I think and every all the growth for us has been so incremental. It's not like we ever just like blew up. Like, yeah, we had a buzz band moment where all of a sudden you get to travel and play all these cool festivals, especially in Europe, and you're young and you party a lot and everything. But um, the punkness that's just tattooed into our bones is being sort of level-headed and always thankful to be anywhere,
Right.
not taking anything for granted. I think that that's just something you see more, and that's very much a punk. Like, I would never, we will fucking carry our own gear. We're setting our shit up. We'll help other bands if they are coming to town and trying to find a place to play. You know what I mean? Like, because it's just so much in the history of the band. And I just think that no matter how far away you get from something, you remember that. It's very different from you're 19 and your band signs to a major label and the first thing you do is giant and you stay in five-star hotels and like
Yeah.
$1 million buses and everything's just like, why isn't there like where's my kombucha? We just didn't
Yeah. Yeah.
we just didn't come from that. So I think that will never go away.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the other thing that's punk about us is that we're not very good musicians. Like compared to like when you get to these huge shows supporting things where like you got guys that are in the band that are just professional players and they're just virtuosic level musicians.
Mm,
We're still punk in our abilities. You know what I mean? I think our strong suit is just being lovers and historians of music.
yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's a fascinating thing, and obviously there are elements of the bands that you've referenced before in your sound. Again, bands like Ministry, and obviously bands from Manchester in the UK, and that sort of post-punk vibe. This might be a bit of a dirty word for you, obviously referring on the punk side of things. But do you think much about the legacy of Health in the same way that Ministry have a legacy, Nin have a legacy, you are shaping your legacy now with millions of fans, followers, across the internet and around the world? Do you think much about the legacy of Health and that, or does it not really come into your awareness, Jake?
Oh, no, absolutely. I think that especially when you it's funny because we make very strange music and I think that now there's more in it that could have just in terms of structure and melodicism like a
Mm,
broader appeal and because the sort of great leveler of things that the internet has become and connecting to so many different kinds of people that have non-mainstream tastes. I guess we could have some broader appeal, but I think that there's been times, you're working with a record label or you're people are really hyped about a record and they're like, oh, this is going to be really big or something. And you can get in your own head about expectations about what kind of reach certain music is going to have. And I think that it's been much more healthy and gratifying to sort of focus on it from a legacy perspective, not like a hyper narcissistic vantage, but more just okay, what we have is our output and our discography and the music that we've made and wanting to sort of jealously guard that quality and at the end of the day, that's what we'll have. And when I was a kid, the bands that really inspired me. I mean, I grew up in Seattle and my dad was a rock dad, so I saw Nirvana and shit when I was like a little kid. So yeah, there was obviously exposure to bands that got huge. But when I got older, and even to this day, a lot of the bands that I really look up to are not, it's rare that you have a thing where it's like Nine Inch Nails, where your band is a critical and commercial juggernaut that gets to safeguard a legacy. But a lot of times, um, you know, the bands that were most inspiring to me were not giant bands, not bands that got rich from making music, or if they tour now or when they retired from touring, got to tour huge venues or anything. But when I looked at the music they released and the way they presented that music visually, production wise, that it was wall to wall, aesthetically well curated and inspiring. And I think that that's to come down on like an existential level. It's something that you actually have control over, in as much as the sort of illusion of control, rather than being like, "Ooh, I hope we get a TikTok hit or some shit, like that." So it's definitely something we think about. I think it's the I won't say the chief concern, but I think that it's something that's very important to me. Is I would love to, like, I look at a band, like we did a show recently with Converge. We were over in Germany, and I think that that's a great example where, they've just stayed a working, respectable, tasteful band. And, some fans might age out and then they get new fans that are younger, but no one is ever like, oh, yeah, they fucking jumped the shark.
Yeah.
And I think that that's very inspiring to me. That's where I'd like to be.
Yeah, no, that is a very succinct explanation, Jake, as well. I mean, that was one of the questions I had for later, and I will. I'm going to bring it up now before we talk about the record itself. You talked about sort of the aesthetic continuity of Health, and one of the things that I've always loved across your releases is the artwork and that kind of the way that you present the band across social media, which I know is the polar opposite perhaps to the Sonic, the post-apocalyptic nature of the sound, and then the comedy of the social media. But you've got a great brand, is what I'm saying, and a brand can be a dirty word as well. But you have a great brand, I think. So how important, Jake, now is that visual, the artwork, and that visual representation of Health to you? Because it does feel like you're very aware, if it's okay for me to use that word, brand, of what you're trying to do visually, what you're trying to communicate to people, and how you want to come across aesthetically, if that's that is,
yeah,
I feel like it's the right term.
Yeah, it's hugely important. Brand, I don't think, is a dirty word. It's a synonym for so many other things. You could say aesthetic, you could say like taste, whatever. So even when the band started, I think we always thought we were looking at like post-punk artwork, and then like curation of certain labels, like Impulse Records, like the famous jazz label, and just where, or you could even look at like especially the early Sub Pop releases. There's just an absolute universe that they created visually, and we always thought it would be cool if when the band was done, if you exhibited, and this is just a thought experiment, not like that anyone would do this, but if you removed the band name and printed all the album artwork on like large format canvases and put them all in a gallery, that they would all look like they were part of the same retrospective. And I think that was just kind of a mission statement thing. And there's a lot of bands, and for better or for worse, maybe their penchant is just for music, and label hires someone to do everything's going to end up looking kind of like an era, even if you just do photography, which is probably the safest way to not because things date so much, but you know, you just get that thing where a band has completely disparate artwork for every album because they just hired someone else to do it. And we just really didn't want to do that. We wanted to make sure that it always felt like it was part of the same body of work. Not necessarily exactly the same period, that there's an evolution, but there's just this like, oh, that's what health records look like. And then I think that the strange contrast of the social media and all the shit posty funny stuff is that, you know, that is a medium that came well after like our formative ideas about how to present a band. And I don't think that you necessarily have to maintain the same identity on your Twitter or on your Instagram account as what your band is, because I'm not saying it's disingenuous, but they're just really reflective of different worlds. You know, there's a lot of duality, and we've just realized about our fans that the people that are identifying with the deadly seriousness of the music and the lyrical content are not diametrically, they're not mutually exclusive of one another, that like the funny shit on they're the same people. You know, it's like we're all struggling and trying to get through life, and unless you're lying, most of us are like palliating some of that with fucking around on the internet, just looking at dumb shit, trying to distract ourselves and just get through it. And I think that there's been times where it's like, oh, it would be great to just be like to be able to present your Instagram like Nine Inch Nails or something. But it's like, you know, that's a band that was able to cement their aesthetic well before they already had a legacy, you know? And I think that that's a great resource to be able to draw on. But for us, it's like we're just trying to. But then if you look at the way Trent operates, like he's on his Discord and he like will post funny shit on his personal Instagram. You know, like I think there needs to be an effort to stay actually connected with how people interface with the world now. Otherwise, you risk just really like becoming tone deaf.
Yeah. So staying in touch with that audience, and you've done that very well. In terms of the record itself, because I want to get a few questions in on the record. Now, I know better than to ask you for direct song meanings, but if I was to reference, Demigods, obviously you just brought out as a single, but then DSM-5, which continues that theme, and then Unloved, as just some examples. They do feel like quite personal and reflective. So without going into as much or as little as you feel comfortable doing, did this record give you and the other members of the band, but you yourself, because you're the one here with me, did the record give you any catharsis from any shit you might have been going through? Any of those, again, you mentioned, we're all just trying to get through stuff. And so I wonder, did this record give you catharsis, or did it cement anything for you? And how deep would you like to go into that, I guess, Jay?
I don't have an issue with discussing thematic things. I just don't want to be explicit about lyrics.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a completely germane topic. I would say this is unquestionably the most personal record for me, definitely from a lyrical perspective. And I mean, not only was it cathartic, I would say I've been having a very difficult time emotionally over the last several years, and it's sort of continuing, unfortunately. And I feel like I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't been able to make this music over the last couple of years. So aside from it just being cathartic, I think it was like essential from a sort of mental health survival standpoint. I can almost, I don't know, you can always pontificate about whatever you think might would have happened, but I think if I hadn't had that outlet, which is ultimately a constructive and positive one, I think that the other outlets would have been not positive or constructive. They would have been the reverse. They would have
Mm,
been destructive. Um, and there's a song like DSM-5 is about that, and that's one of the ones that's like editorial, a little bit more universal, not from the me perspective, but more you.
mm,
Um, it's about that addictive drive to destructive behavior, whatever form that it takes,
mm,
whether
mm.
or not it's substances, sex, compulsion, just that sort of faltering of our evolutionary biology that gets weaponized against us,
Yeah.
that I've struggled with so much in my life. So
Mm.
yeah, very, very personal, very cathartic, meaningful record for me.
Yeah, yeah. I think that comes across. I did want to, again, just to look at, say, ashamed and don't try as well. I wonder, again, is that you? And this is my interpretation, so please correct me. Is that you kind of giving people that are maybe going through some of the same things, people that might be feeling, ashamed of being born, who are struggling with some of the same things that you're perhaps struggling? Are you trying to give people that distraction, even if it's just for, however long the record is? Your fans, I know from listening to John's interviews that fans do message you guys, talk about real problems, talk about stuff. Is this about you not only providing catharsis for yourself, but also for give some of that back to the fans that use your music as that? I don't know if that's a bit of a reach on my part, but
No, 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 it's not. I think that because John interacts with the fans much
mm,
more, he's more cognizant of that, and I think that I we've already kind of built up a fan base of people that are connecting to those kind of lyrical themes because that's what I've always sort of written about. So I think that more the mandate this time was for me to just try to be more personally honest, like when I was writing. And I think
mm,
that like a song like Ashamed, there's a lot more lyrical content on this record that's almost like stream of consciousness, where instead of reshaping scratch demo vocal lyrics where you're like, okay, I have the vowel sound, but I need like an actual sensical phrase. A lot of it is just the first thing that I wrote.
mm,
Um, and so I think that's part of why a song like that is so direct. And
mm,
I think that when you do that, you don't really need to try to write so that your fan base can connect to it because they're already going to
yeah,
because you're being honest.
yeah, yeah,
So I think that there's a lot more of I think it was actually more that process of like, okay, I'm just going to be vulnerable and honest, and that will be probably the best thing. And consequently, just like us putting that song out online or putting a video up on YouTube definitely seems to have engendered the most sort of visceral and emotive reaction of any song for our fans. And I think that that is probably just directly proportional to the fact that it's a very honest
mm,
song.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. It certainly feels like that to me as a listener. Two or three more questions now, then, Jake, before we finish up. This next question actually relates to that. There's a line in the press release at the end of it that says that Health has become a band that is comfortable with their own uncomfortableness, and I feel like that maybe relates a little bit to your answer. So when you're being more open, honest, when you're opening yourself up more on this record than you have done previously, are you becoming comfortable with your own uncomfortableness? Does that make sense? Is this you saying I'm actually comfortable with some of the difficult stuff I'm going through?
I think that that's true on multiple levels. The funny thing is press materials are typically not written by the band, and most of that one isn't. But that line I wrote because I'll go through and I want things to feel like they're in our voice.
Mm,
So it's like I'll do like some editorial stuff, and I think that I mean that, and I'll try to be succinct with this if we have a couple more questions. I mean it on multiple levels. I mean it personally, but then also the band. Like accepting that, like as I was saying earlier, we're a strange band. It's like hard to categorize us. Maybe we're not going to be a household name kind of band, but we're going to try to um, present ourselves and our ultimate, like our legacy, our discography in a way that we're proud of, and just accepting that we're always kind of an odd man out musically, and then maybe that's the virtue.
Mm.
And then for me personally, yeah, comfortable with my own uncomfortableness is just like, I think that there's so much time spent trying to feel okay or not feel bad that your life can get away from you, not understanding that what you have is what you have in the present moment.
Yeah.
And I think that we're just always in this fight or flight sort of casting ourselves back into the past to reconnect with like how things were, or projecting ourselves into the future of how we want them to be. And I'm certainly extremely guilty of this, of just like, but sometimes it doesn't need to be like, oh, I don't want to be sad. Just be like, yeah, that's fine. Accept what it is. And
Mm.
I think that that's sort of what I was trying to say there.
Yeah, I certainly relate to that. If we had more time, I'd delve deep into that. But I do want to quickly ask you before we do the roundup question. I know you mentioned you now have a toddler, or not quite a toddler, but you've changed a lot since the beginning of health. Could you give me a couple of examples of what you've learned about yourself over the from the beginnings of health? I know we're talking a long time to where you are now. How different do you feel from that person, from back at that time to where you are now? How have you changed and developed, aside from obviously having a family now and doing some arenas?
For me personally, and I don't want to speak for my bandmates, but I think it's probably more drastic in my case, is I
Mm.
feel almost unrecognizable to myself.
Mm.
Um, you know, but most of that change is honestly in the last 6 to 8 years.
Okay.
Um, because I just had a lot of like, like I'm an only child, and my mom got sick and died, and that was the craziest thing I'd ever dealt with. And right before that, and not unrelated to it, I had sort of like a adulthood long um, battle with addiction to alcohol and drugs that I had to deal with. And then I had a kid, and then the pandemic happened. And then I had like a major mental health crisis. So it's just been an incredibly, and just like a lot of other things, like my partner who I share my life with has a very sick parent that that's also become a very big part of our lives. So it's just like, there's just a lot of very adult heavy shit.
Yeah.
Some of it good, some of it awful, but none of it being characteristic of like the levity of youth that has
Mm.
just sort of transmogrified me into like a completely different person.
Yeah, yeah. I really appreciate your honesty with me today, Jake, as well. Thank you so much for sharing that. Hopefully, we'll have more time to delve into that, in the future. But just as we finish, I'm going to give the floor to you. Is there anything you'd like to finish up? Anything I've missed? I know you've got some US dates coming, some international dates coming next year. Obviously, new record is coming. Is there anything you'd like to add, a message to fans, or anything else before we finish up?
Uh, Thank you for listening. We don't get to do this without people paying attention. And I think that that's the most important thing to be grateful for. And thank you for taking the time. Yeah, Rat Wars out December 7th. We start our tour with Sleep Token on December 5th. We'll be back in Europe for festivals in the summer, and then for a headline run in the fall. And we have a US headline tour starting in the beginning of March. It's going to be a very busy year for health.
Absolutely. Fantastic. We'll look forward to seeing you out on the road, Jake. Thank you so much for the time, mate. Really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. You have a great evening.